agreements for the use of natural resources, a way of doing shared governance. And so we wait to share with you the next 2 hours that are up to us. And now I'm going to grant the word to my colleague from the Protected Areas Division so that she can share with you how things have gone in this webinar on governance.
Hola.
Ahí está cargando tu pantalla. Ahí se ve.
Hello.
Bien. Buen
Yes.
día.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being here today, joining us. I just wanted to show you, since this is the last day of the 8 webinars, the last one of the cycle, we wanted to show you what has happened in the 7 previous sessions, the result that we've had of this cycle of webinars. First of all, I wanted to mention that this cycle was developed thanks to the alliance and joint work between the integration project for the Amazon protected areas, which is an agreement between FAO, WWF, UN Environment, and UICN South. Also Red Parques, and also the working group on governance for the Amazon Vision. This is the Yappa project. We've had 22 experiences received throughout Latin America, and it's these little red dots that you see on screen. We've had experiences from the north, from Honduras, for example, from the Trifinio, a cross-borders area between El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, an experience in Costa Rica, also 3 experiences in Venezuela, including the Canaima National Park, a few for the territorial planning from the Catashna state, and we've also had several experiences in Colombia showing special management, and in particular in the case of the Yappa Park. And we also had 2 experiences with regards to the work in other areas across borders between Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, and how protected areas are linked to territorial planning. Today we have the presentation on Laguna Limacoche with regards to agreements for soil use. In Peru, we also had several presentations, including the communal reserve of Amaracayli, also the experience on agreements on soil use. And today we have an experience shared between Peru and Brazil on hydrological resources. We had 3 experiences on the Brazilian side as well. One of the lower Rio Negro area, one on participative planning. And today we will hear about an experience in the Mamiragua Reserve, also on agreements for soil use. And today Walter will also be presenting one experience on hydrobiological uses between Peru and Brazil. And we also had one experience of the cross-borders management on the side of Uruguay, Argentina, and Brazil. And these 3 dots that you see there on screen represent 3 global experiences, such as the Amazon Vision, the Huerta, the Treaty for the Amazon Basin, and Cicosur, the area for integration between Central and South America. All of these experiences shed light on mechanisms, way of doing governance, some successful, some still have big challenges. We spoke of 12 countries involved, more than 1,000 people enrolled in these webinars, and we've had the participation of between 80 and 280 people throughout each one of these webinars. And to close this report, we wanted to thank publicly, and time again, since we've already done them, and we will continue to do so, our thanks to those who participated and who currently participate the three lecturers today who are presenting their experience, since each one of them has prepared their presentation and has taken up their time to share their experiences in this cycle precisely with you. For each one, a special thanks. I grant you the word again, Christina, go ahead. Thank you, Stanley. Thank you very much for giving us a picture of all of the path that we've walked in this working groups. It's very gratifying to collaborate and to share with so many colleagues from throughout the whole region. I will now grant the word to several colleagues, friends, and partners from the whole initiative, and I will start with Claudia Marin, the coordinator for the Yappa project for FAO, so that she may share a few words with us in this closing session of this cycle. Claudia, thank you very much, Christina, and thank you very much, Stanley, for your report. I'm truly pleased to see that this cycle of webinars has been so successful. And I'm truly pleased to see so many familiar faces here. I saw them throughout the whole 8 webinars. And we hope that this has strengthened the bond between different countries so that we can really identify what elements unite us, where we have common problems, but where we also have common solutions that unite us as a region through the protected areas. So I simply wanted to extend a special thanks to UCI, to the Latin American Faculty of Protected Areas, to Christina, Stanley, Paula, Veronica, Alan, who devoted so much time and effort to make sure that this series of webinars would be successful. And it couldn't have been so without the fantastic working group on governance of the Amazon Vision. That support has truly been spectacular. We believe that these are the things that truly strengthen us as a region and that really strengthen the Amazon that we want for Latin America. We'll be here to support you, to share experiences through time. So I don't want to take too much time away from you. I just simply wanted to thank everyone who participated, in particular the lecturers who took the time to make their presentations, to share their experiences. And so I don't want to take away too much time, but I just wanted to tell you that we are preparing a number of online courses for self-learning as a result of these webinars, but also based on other courses on other topics that we are developing with UCI between 2020 and 2021. So please be aware that we will be sharing that information with you, and we want to invite you to continue strengthening this technical cooperation network, which is the PART Networks, which is more than just a network of technicians. It's a network of friends. And Yappa has all of its partners, the European Union, FAO, UNDP, WWF, for forging the path forward. So thank you all very much. And today's will be a fantastic exercise to speak of the use of natural resources as a way to do governance. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Claudia. I'll now grant the word to our colleague and friend, Claudia Nunez from Parks of Colombia, as a representative and coordinator, in this case, of the working group on governance and of the Amazon Vision Group. Thank you very much, Christina. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and students who join us today. A warm welcome to all of you as Elab, Stanley, to you, Alan. Likewise, a warm welcome for our coordinator, Claudia Marin. I simply wanted to add to the report that Stanley shared with us. Fantastic. I also wanted to add that for the purposes of this exercise, we also have the participation of 6 systems of national parks of the Amazon Vision. This joint effort meant that 6 different people had to work hand in hand with the support of ELAP, which initially was 2 people, Stanley and Alan, but that today we can say really this dream that we started in October already is, as Claudia said, behind these efforts, we can really meet online but we also have the fundamental support of many people, the interpreters. So I'd simply add to this fantastic information, especially because I would like to highlight that today we are fulfilling a dream. And I think that those of us who are involved right now are very excited currently about what we started in October. We had to review again in December, January, and February. We were fearful. But to have this today, we are very proud of it. And we're thrilled. And today we're celebrating. And I stay with what Claudia and Marin said, the importance of the Parks Network. And we have a challenge ahead of us, a challenge to achieve, because aside from connecting with each other, different people, the challenge is to continue connecting more people to us. And it's not just a matter of connecting people, but also connecting talent, connecting processes, connecting high quality information, so that the Parks Network, which is the best sustainable platform that I know of, I'm not going to say how long because otherwise I'll be giving away my age, but the Parks Network is truly the most sustainable network for South-South cooperation in the region among the protected area systems and all of the stakeholders involved, from the local to the global, because we have FAO, we have UNDP, etc. But I wanted to point out the importance of the generational transition. We're truly proud to be here today, but we mentioned this in a few of the video conferences. The fact that we're applauding compliance with the objectives today is because 10 years ago, there were people who believed in the Amazon vision, authorities in protected areas who established the Amazon vision in the Parks Network and who believed in this, FAO, WWF, but behind these institutions, there are people. So as people and professionals connecting talent, it's also up to us to envision how we're going to do this transfer, this generational transfer, so that the Parks conclusion that I saw throughout these 8 webinars and the work that was continued since October. And it's to say that finally the governance in protected areas and in the Amazon biome is related with weaving dreams, and not to lose hope of having a better Amazon and a model for development that truly integrates and respects nature and the different ways of life that exists in the biome, aside from all of the cultural knowledge that is there. There are many stories, there are many anecdotes throughout all of the experience, and the anecdotes and stories are what helps us to do knowledge, not just on the technical and academic side, but how I do this, but also how I achieve this in order to establish this knowledge. We need to shift gears to continue telling stories, and that also means untangling knots. We need to be willing to face not just successes, but also obstacles, challenges, and we need to have all of the enthusiasm to overcome these obstacles. And I want to just close by saying we have a big challenge on the working group on governance, on working hand in hand with UCI, UNDP, FAO, the Parks Networks, and it's that we need to continue adapting to the tensions that exist in the region. We must not fear the tensions related to protected areas. Governance is the best mechanism, tool to truly adjust these processes. We need to keep learning from our mistakes and enhance our successes, and we must always start again when things are not working. So I wish you great success, and we as the working group on governance, in hand with ALAP, FAO, WWF, UECN, and UNDP, we have more work to continue after these webinars, and we hope that we can continue telling you about the products that we will compile from these experiences. And I want to thank you. Also, I want to thank COVID, because if we had met in person, we wouldn't have been able to meet as much as we did online. So There's always positives in the middle of darkness. And this is one of the stars that we found. We were connected to a great community of learning. Thank you very much, and I wish you a great success today. Thank you very much, Claudia, for your kind words. Thank you for planning this whole process and for working with all of the groups so that we've received this fruitful port. I will now grant the word to Veronica Mendieta. She is from CONAP Mexico, but in her role as representative for the Technical Secretariat of CONAP Mexico of the Parks Network right now. Veronica, go ahead. Thank you, Christina. Well, what can I say after these beautiful and exciting words from Claudia? I think that the moral of the story here is that all the success has been thanks to our people, not the institution. So I wanted to congratulate you all because you have been part of these opportunities. Doesn't matter what the working plan says, what the objectives are. Without you, it wouldn't have been possible. So thank you, each and every one of you, for making this possible. And I wanted to also continue working on these exchanges, these environments, and leverage these type of virtual environments that give us the opportunity to continue. Not everything is success. You won't always share case studies, but you want to learn the most valuable information. So I like to leverage all of these things that we could not even envision before, to meet every Thursday or every Friday. This would have been unthinkable in the past. So we need to just simply continue this effort, to join efforts with the Parks Network and become part of the family, be members of the area systems and leverage this great platform. Please have our support. We will continue supporting these types of events. And congratulations, thank you for all of your efforts behind all of these processes and both assistants, professors, translation, because little by little, we break down the language barrier and other barriers that exist. So congratulations, and let's keep marching forth. Thank you very much, Veronica. Thank you very much for your support in this whole process and the joint effort in setting up this cycle of courses. So I will finally grant the word to our colleague Alan Valverde and the presentation of the UCI and ELAP. Please go ahead. Thank you, Chris. Good morning. I apologize at once because I know that I sound like I'm coming from beyond the grave, but yesterday I had a long day of discussions and I'm, so my voice is suffering as a result of it. Thank you for being here. You've all meant this has been a success. These webinars are not just sharing, it's building together. For us, for UCI, for ELAP, it's a pleasure to add a grain of sand to make this a reality. There's 8 webinars, and 8 webinars go by very quickly, but what's behind this process has been a lot of work. So I wanted to thank Stanley, Christina, the colleagues, Paula, Veronica, and also all our partners who were there behind us, Claudia Nunez, and the rest of the team behind Amazon Vision, who've been promoting this, the Yappa and Parks Network colleagues. It's all of you and your experiences which have made possible these webinars. So we also thank you very much for creating awareness. We have recorded these events in Spanish, English, and Portuguese, and we will share all 8 of them so that you can share them with other people and so they can keep them with you. These have been very high-level events. I also want to thank Bernardo and his translation team. We understand that these types of activities need to reach out to the whole world, and it's a need for our whole Latin American region and the Caribbean, which is why it's important to make these efforts in these languages. We hope that you can send this out to more people. And also I want to offer you, as it was mentioned by Veronica, this support. on this topic or any other topic related to protected areas. These are our reason for existing. So if you need anything specifically, support in any of these areas, and you think that we can support you, please keep us in mind. You have our information, and we're more than willing to support you in anything you need, as long as it contributes to strengthening our protected area system. Thanks to the Yappa colleagues, thanks to the colleagues from the Amazon Vision for believing in these processes and for allowing us to support you. I'm not going to take more time so that we can start with the specific activities of the webinar. A warm welcome. Thank you, Alan. Thank you for sharing these kind words with all of you. And if it seems okay to you, we will start with today's topic. As we mentioned, give me just a second to start this. The topic today is agreements on the use of natural resources, a way for doing shared governance. Thank you, Vero and Pausi. If you can support us with the microphone, we ask everyone to keep your microphone muted. So today we will have 3 presentations about these topics based on the foundations, the realities of Latin America in general, of the Amazon basin in general, which is where oftentimes protected areas are declared in territories that have traditional uses by different communities, well, indigenous people, farmers, for descendants, or marine coastal communities. And so there's usually conflicts on the use of natural resources, especially in traditional territories where they have rights to use and access. And that is just kind of the proposal to do agreements on the use of natural resources. This was born in the region as a way to improve the management of conflicts, prevent conflicts sometimes, manage them or even resolve them in others, to improve the territorial governance and the governance of protected areas and these landscapes. In general, when we see a conservation scenario with the figure of protected area, the objective for conservation in these resources involves regulating their use, but it's important to keep into account the existing rights of the populations that use the areas and to find joint ways of managing them to achieve long-term conservation of these resources, but also to ensure the proper living and subsistence of these communities that oftentimes in the areas of the Amazon, these natural resources are key for living in harmony and for continuing forth with the vision of the cosmovision of many people that have different cultures to ours. So we will now share a few case studies, 3 case studies, that will tell us in a practical manner how they tackle this topic and how we will manage the natural resources. So we will see a first case presented by Claudia Torres from Miraua, Brazil, which is known as Pirarucu and community surveillance. And then we will look at the Concocha Reserve with the Ministry of the Environment, Water and Transition of Ecuador, and to establish a code for sustainable fishery in this reserve. And finally, Walter Cano Cardona from UICN South will speak of regional agreements for the ordering of the use of hydrobiological resources in the border area of the southern landscape of the Yappa project. And finally, we will have a round of questions and answers, and then we will close the event. So, Ana Claudia, are you there? Chris, Ana Claudia's presentation is not in yet, but she can share her presentation, or do you want us to start perhaps with Darwin? Ana Claudia? Let me confirm. Ana Claudia? So do you want us to start with the case of Limonconcha? Yeah, I think it's better. Darwin, are you there? Can you hear us? Yes, I hear you. Okay, fantastic. So if it sounds okay to you, while we solve the issue of the presentation of Ana Claudia, we can start with the case history of Ecuador. Share your screen, please, so that we can see. And in the meanwhile, I can tell you, I wanted to let you know that he was a park ranger for the Cujaweno Reserve and also the Biological Reserve of Limoncocha, and he's now in charge of it, and he will be sharing information about the code for sustainable fishery, in this case of the Limoncocha Reserve in Ecuador. You will have to share your presentation in full screen, Darwin, please.
Well, you have 20 minutes, and I will let you know when you have 5 minutes left, so you can start organizing the closing of your presentation. Thank you. Well, I would like to share with you all the experience and work that we have been carrying out with the communities on the Code of Conduct for Sustainable Fishing on the Biological Reserve. So let's start. We are going to talk about where we are. First, we are in Ecuador on the National System of Protected Areas, and we have 4 subsystems. That is our heritage in Ecuador. And in the case of this reserve, we have PANI, GAD, all the communities that are handled by the communities themselves, and the private areas that are handled by individuals. SNAP has 62 protected areas. SNAP is the National System of Protected Areas, and they are all part of the same system in Ecuador. I wanted to tell you as well that these are some of the problems that we have to face and some of the threats as well here in Ecuador. And I guess that the same applies to all Latin America, which is the development of illegal activities, uncontrolled tourism, not being aware of the boundaries of the protected areas and the advances of the agricultural boundaries. And particularly in this area, of course, we have some problems with the communities that are expanding their boundaries. So we have this problem because we do not have communities within the area, but we are surrounded by all these communities, and they have these boundaries, but sometimes these agricultural boundaries keep on advancing. And also, as for illegal activities, we have hunting, something that we cannot deny. And when we talk about the sustainable fishing, this is part of the rights. And as for the non-controlled tourism, well, this is something that is not in excess, but because tourism is not as important, but it has to be taken into consideration as well. So since 2014, we started to implement tourism to try and provide the opportunities for the people to take advantage of this for working purposes. And also, as for the boundaries, we have had problems with 6 people specifically that do not recognize the boundaries of the protected area. So we are currently in the regularization process for this. And as for the ownership of the land, we have problems with some people as well. but we are also in the process of solving this situation, and we foresee to have it solved by the end of the year. And now going to the general data of the protected area, it was created on September 23rd, 1985. It has 4,613 hectares at 210 meters above sea level and an average temperature of 25 degrees Celsius. It has a high diversity of flora and fauna. And since 1998, it has been recognized as a Ramsar site, and the emblematic species is the black caiman. We have two lagoons, the Limoncocha Lagoon, which we'll be focusing on today, where we conduct this sustainable fishing for the community and where we expect to have more tourism. And we also have another lagoon, Anacocha, that we consider a maximum protection area. And in the back, as you can see, we have the Napo River. This is our management model for our reserve. It has each period is for 5 years. When it comes to the management and administration, everything has to be handled like clockwise. Everyone has to conduct their activities. We have management, administration, then biodiversity and monitoring, public use and tourism, environmental education, surveillance and control. So if we want to attain our goals, for example, to decrease the pressure on the ecological resources, we have to work together in order to be able to attain this. And this is the way our management system works. Some of the background of the agreements. How did this process started? Well, I wanted to tell you that it started in accordance with the construction of an environmental baseline and also a social and economical one for the biological reserve Limoncocha back in 2014, because the data show that commercial fish like bagre, bocachico, sardines, and others had some pressure for fishing purposes. So everything began to alter the composition of this lagoon. So since then, we started with this process. These are some of the initial background in order to start working along with the communities to come to agreements for the development of a code for sustainable fishing. And what we wanted was to set the baseline. These are the fish with the highest demand. They are bagre mota, the one that we have first. Luego we have guarachi. That's the Quechua name, and we also have the smallmouth, the sea bass, and the balarquina. These are the ones that are overexploited in this case by the community. But the idea is to set this way in a sustainable manner for the protected areas and not to affect them. Well, after gathering all this data and knowing which are the fish with the most pressure in this protected area, our management started to look first to a way to identify all sectors that could help us or cooperate with us in order to come up with this code for sustainable fishing. So these are some of our stakeholders. We have the SEC University, which with the one that we have an agreement, Petro Amazonas, some NGOs that have been working with us. And we also have the GATS, like the Ministry of Livestock and Environment. And what's most important is that we had to take into consideration the 5 communities that we have the Azoquil communities. That's the name of the association for Limoncocha, and they include these 5 communities that are inside it, and also the Association of Tourism Service Providers in Limoncocha, and these are the ones that we started working with on this process. And after we identified all of them, we started meeting with the communities of Limoncocha in order to develop a sustainable fishing code with the knowledge and cultural and ancestral experience of all elderly people in the community that have been a great contribution to the creation of this document. So thanks to their support and their sincerity, because much of this information that was provided by these people during the meetings and by conducting surveys. So they contributed a great deal. I would say that it adds up to 75% of the code, or even more, because we conducted all the work, but they provided the information. So afterwards, after all the meetings that we have, I think we held 8 meetings throughout 2014. This was a great beginning. So we started with the development of this code. So it was a whole process that started with information gathering. And now we can provide some general data on this fishing code. Well, the idea is to preserve aquatic ecosystems. And of course, it has some duties because we need to do it in a sustainable manner. So they were all in agreement, because this is something that comes from our ancestors. And this is the way in which we want to do it. So everything was done together, and they all agreed in most of the ideas. We must respect the quality, diversity, and availability conditions of the fishing resources in enough amounts for the present and future generations. And this is something that we have always tried to focus on, because they told us before that in order for fishing to be sustainable, they need to reflect, because they need to find a way to do it, because they were fishing less fish but took more time. So they themselves recognized that fishing was being overexploited, so there were less resources. And this is why we wanted to develop this code of conduct. And we need to avoid overexploitation, because, as I said, the fishing capacity should be proportional to the production capacity of these fishing resources, so that we can take advantage of them, but in a sustainable manner. As you can see, this is an aerial picture. This is where we are. These are the communities of Limoncocha. And in here, we have the lagoon. This is the community of Limoncocha that has shown demographic growth as well. And the lagoon has 2.5 square kilometers, as you can see. This is where all the fishing is done. 2.5 square kilometers, 250 hectares. Its depth is 3 meters, and it's a source of food for the population on Limoncocha. We have 298 families, and according to the last census, they have 830 people. So as you can imagine, there's great pressure for all the people that come here for fishing purposes, because this is the only lagoon that we have in Limoncocha. So throughout the whole parish, and as I said, it's quite big, but according to the last electoral data, the whole parish of Limoncocha has approximately 6,000 people, and they are all of age. And we have 5 communities. And in the center of Limoncocha, they have only 130 people, which are the ones that are closer to the boundaries of the protected areas. So we started creating specific regulations that we wanted to apply, and everything was done together, and we have the model for the ID, in which we have the name of the ship, the dimensions, the color, material, if it's a fiber or if it's wood, the engine, and the association or community that they belong to. And another specific rule is that they need to identify the places where they are so that they don't go to forbidden areas. And we are surrounded by this community of Limoncocha, and they had way too many accesses or ways to enter into the lagoon because they are close to the border. So they have approximately 7 entries. So it was quite difficult for us to control fishing or people getting into. So we came to an agreement so that we would allow to enter through the authorized port, the one authorized by the Ministry of the Environment. So another specific aspect is that they can go fishing twice per week. Those fishermen that have been registered, and they must promise to observe the restrictions on and also the map for the areas, and they must be up to date with all the permits necessary for the crew and for the biggest ships or vessels. So all permits have to be granted by the respective authorities, and users should use the docks or the areas in which they are authorized to stop. So we also have some agreements, but in order to come to this agreement, because we have only, as I mentioned before, we had the baseline, but we wanted everyone to get more involved so that we can establish, for example, how many fish were they able to fish. So we started gathering information, and let me explain specifically what we did. Well, at 6 a.m., the fishermen in Limoncocha start fishing. They leave, I don't know, at 3 a.m. and they go to the protected area. And so they leave at dawn, and between 5 or 5:30 in the morning. So we were waiting for them so that when they came out of the protected area, we were able to talk to them, and we were requesting some data, like, for example, how many fish they caught and the types or species of fish, so that we could come up with a table with all this information. So this is something that we have been doing together, and with the support of all the stakeholders, because we must understand that at the beginning, not everyone was willing to cooperate, because as you can imagine, if you leave so early in the morning and you come up tired and all wet, and many people were not that willing to spend time, like counting fish and weighing them and telling us about their species. So this was a job that we did jointly with the people that supported us with the protected areas. So once we have gathered all this information, we had some restrictions set. Darwin, excuse me for interrupting you, but you have only 5 minutes left. Okay, so as for all this information, in order for us to have more reliable information and to be able to set some restrictions or minimum size for fishing, this is the table that we came up with after all this process. So we set, for example, the minimum size for fishing. For example, according to the different species, for example, Boca Chico, it has a minimum of 20 centimeters. Taking into consideration that they have to develop a little bit more in order to be better when it comes to eating them. So we set these restrictions that were for the sizes and quantities. And you cannot heat the water as a fishing method, because this is a method that they were using in the beginning, but it was forbidden. They are not allowed to leave their nets abandoned. And each fisherman is allowed to have two nets of 40 meters. And these are some of the rules that we set for them, because sometimes they left their nets over there, so they didn't gather the fish, and they went to waste. So now the fishermen must be near the fishing net, and always take them under their surveillance, specifically for their own purposes, and they have to take care of their own fish nets. As I said, well, again, the canoes that are on areas that are not authorized, they can be taken away by the personnel of the Ministry of the Environment, and they have to go through the due administrative process. And in here, there's the dock, and you can see the canoes and the way they leave them. Azoquil must issue a document for the family members that can fish, so that they have the proper authorization. For example, if you have, I don't know, like a cousin or a relative that wanted to fish and they were not a part of the community, or we were not familiar with them, well, of course, there's no inconvenience, but the Azoquil had to issue a document. So they reported, for example, well, I have a brother that wants to come fishing. He doesn't live here, but he wants to come and fish with us. So they authorized him by issuing a document for relatives, so that they were allowed to fish, but only with the authorization of Azoquil. Each fisherman must carry with him an ID authorizing it to fish. And if you don't have that ID, you cannot go fishing. And something important that we included is that we were going to forbid fishing during the closed season, or a fishing ban. And these are some of the results. This is the information that we gathered from the service. Limoncocha is the one with more fishing activity. And these are results from 2019. And I think that we have been following the same process. It's always Limoncocha at the head, but we saw a decrease in canoes, because in 2015 they have 87, and in 2019 51, and we currently have only 51. So you see that that's an important decrease when it comes to fishing canoes. And as for the activities for the future, well, we must conduct surveys on fishermen at least twice a year, which is something that we have been able to do till 2019. In 2020, we had problems with COVID, but so there are things that we still have to update, and because we wanted to have it almost in real time, but we have had some problems. But now we are trying to have this code of conduct for at least 2 or 3 years. So it was finally set at 3 years. And of course, this resulted in problems when it comes to the updating. But as soon as we can, we'll start analyzing all that is there to see if some improvement can be made. We must train the stakeholders and interested parties in order to attain acceptance and empowerment of the processes for citizen participation in protected areas. And these are the perspectives. In order to improve governance, we must strengthen the cooperation governance. And we have some agreements that must be replicated and enlarged. When it comes to the scope regarding the participation of the people involved, we must improve the quality of governance by applying an action plan. We must make more effective the citizen participation through PANE. So in each protected area, we can promote spaces for participation and the involvement of the stakeholders, for example, including the owners of rights and those interested in measuring the effectiveness on the management of each protected area, and train the personnel of the Ministry of the Environment in social topics, because we need to develop this knowledge. They must be trained into social topic, and we must promote the understanding of these social processes by training the personnel of the Ministry of the Environment in relevant topics like governance, justice, rights, gender, participation. In this way, we can improve governance in social aspects, as I said. Well, we want for the new generations to take advantage of, in an adequate manner, of these resources, and to train the big leaders of the future that will be protecting our natural resources. And that these are the kids that are also starting their education, because we want them to grow as the visionaries. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Darwin, for your presentation. It's been excellent. Lovely faces to close your presentation. So now we'll continue from Ana Claudia Torres, our colleague from Brazil. Is she going to share her screen? So Darwin, can you stop sharing your screen so that we can move on to our next presentation? Thank you. Okay, Stanley is going to start. So I'll introduce Ana Claudia Torres. She is a specialist in conservation of natural resources with a master in human sciences. She has been director of the colonies of fishermen C4 between 94 and 1998. And in that role, she coordinated a project in Alabama for the strengthening of the organization of fishermen in these areas, which resulted in the first fishing agreement for the region, also a part of the Camiragua Institute, and coordinator since 2012 for the fishing handling. And they provided technical assistance in the handling of fishing resources. She is also a member of the environmental governance of the Amazon. Thank you, Ana Claudia, for being here with us. You have 20 minutes for your presentation, and I let you know when you have only 5 minutes left so that you can start organizing yourself. Ana Claudia is going to speak in Portuguese, so please bear in mind that you need to look for the icon if you want to listen to the interpretation. Good morning, and thank you for the invitation, for being able to be here and share with you this experience. I have 22 years experience with fishermen in Marihuara, where we have these centers for the conservation. Can you continue, please? I'm going to talk a little bit now about our mission so that you can all understand the context of the work that we currently conduct. I am part of the Institute of Sustainable Development, and we conduct scientific research inside the Amazon. And the idea is to promote scientific research for the conservation of biodiversity through sustainable and participative handling of natural resources in the Amazon. This research So some people might say, well, it's possible to handle our resources with the final purpose. But sometimes we have some answers that we have gotten from this research that these natural resources cannot be or should not be commercialized in order to have more resilience. So this place has 3 areas. We have the 6 different economic alternatives of work projects that work directly with the community. And in here, I'm going to talk specifically about the program for fishing handling. And as part of the lines of action, we work specifically with the pirarucu, with the species that can be highlighted as part of this, but we are also working the experience of handling for ornamental fish, and we also have some fishing agreements and monitoring for all types of fishing activities. So we work in an integrated manner when it comes to monitoring, because we need the feedback provided by this research. So we currently work with technical advisory, and we advise 150 communities and 4 organizations of fishermen, different associations, and fishing organisms or associations, as I said. And we provide the training for these management processes, and we also work by creating and organizing events and by disseminating the good practices, where we try to promote the reflection of our practices in other areas in the Amazon. And when it comes to monitoring, we also work by monitoring the stock, for example, to see by counting, and we also try to work on production, reproduction, and we work with by applying the methodology of and when it comes to research as well, after 22 years, research is still important, and we keep on supporting our team and to see about their migration, how they are disseminated, the different generic varieties, and the quality of the meat. And this is something that we have been trying to do to promote the sales. And of course, everything starts with this scenario,
which is where the first conservation unit was in that region. And one thing that enhances the production capacity of the territory is precisely the Soliman River, which is very important and which supports the territory and which makes it a highly productive soil. 20 years ago, the Pirarucu, as a result of fishing, they experienced an almost complete scarcity of fishery, which led to the first management actions. There was a grave decline in the stock of several fish. And because of the social, cultural, and economical wealth of the region, this was necessary. One more, please, there. So that is where we have the management units located. Even though we are managing 2 important conservation territories, we have one that spans many hectares, and the other is the Mana Reserve with 2 million plus hectares. Management projects, which are managed through the local areas. If you require technical support, seeking to do a differentiated effort to recover the right to fishing again, because in the Amazon state, for several nations, the Ministry of the Environment in the Pirarucu, it's forbidden to fish unless you have are following a number of rules or directives or through fishery. We support these communities in the strategic fishing through the regulatory plan. Here we have the various components of management. We have the scientific basis, the traditional knowledge base, how things were established, which are essentially the foundation of the management, and then the coordinated efforts of the communities. We also have the supervision conducted by the technical team, always reminding the starring role by the users who play a supporting role. They do the bureaucratic effort of drafting the documents that provide subsidies to yearly fishing licenses, drafting reports on fish stocks. And there are some management groups. They all play a starring role in this effort. The management also involves planning, involves a technical team, in the sense that based on the information that we have with regards to studies conducted, we can see what is the best zoning for the use area and non-use, where it's present in the zoning territory. We also work establishing regulations for use shared with the communities, something that has already been established with the legislation. We focus on how the work will do in each of these projects, keeping the stock, the supplies, and the productive sustainable use through the generation of extraction rates in tolerable levels, the respects of the biology and ecology of the species. Maximum 30% can be withdrawn in some areas, allowing the rest to guarantee the reproduction of the species and the territory. It also involves an important system in defining the records of different fishes. It's about doing male or females. And that all involves a tracking system as a consultation to the tools that keep control of production. Technical production, the different licenses that are admitted as far as good practices are concerned. There we have participative management based on all of the elements that we will see. We have social stakeholders, environmental stakeholders, and economic stakeholders. We involve them from the training stages here. In summary, the fishers participate in training sessions and establish rules for use and do counts of the stock, protect the bodies of water, fishing, and commercialize production. And it's established which involves the 70% remaining for the production of species, established for the local governance, that together with the directives on the technical side, gathers the specific rules that will be managing each one of these projects. Here we have the management of priority actions that reveal how we work. We always work in organizing monitoring, sale, and it involves the criteria established and the terms that are respected, the process of managing all of these types of efforts. And the way this was identified, the three phases: the socioeconomic stage, training, and the training as far as facilitating the management, mobilizing and creating meetings, keeping a records of the fishers, professional laws, and the system for surveillance, enhancing the capacity for fishing, the planning of fishing, the monitoring, and annual assessment. In phase 3, which is what we know as the advisory phase, is to support the efforts, the technical support, and also to tend to the prerequisites of the management and the resources of the process, the implementation of a protection system, and to make sure that this was complied with, submitting the program that after the analysis and making sure that it was complied with in a satisfactory manner, and providing support to the process, such as providing fishing licenses, which is part of a feedback effort that is conducted on a yearly basis. You can move on to the next slide. And so here we have the summary of the technical advisory by the Institute, which involves a support stage, involves training, promotion of events, and the creation of awareness of best practices. As part of the support stage, this involves participative assessment, the drafting or review of an internal regulation, meetings on fishing agreements, and a count of fish when it's possible, and also the sale, this is not a requirement, the fishing, and also the marketing, which has a focus on fishermen and buyers. Establishing the appropriate links that are required to make sure that these were legitimately fished species. As part of the training sessions, we have some sessions that we show here in these pictures. We have a counting methodology, certifying the counters, which is the type of assessment of the counters, of the fish counters that are trained. The monitoring of the quality of that counting, the training on that monitoring of production. We also have education for management, some basic notions for the financial management of natural resources. And we also provide some basic notions on the management of the counting, but also the quality of the fish. We have a group of fishermen from a village where their production is equivalent to 1 million reales. And this enhances the strength of the group, the quality of the fish. So in terms of promoting events, this involves the meeting of the people that manage the business, that are from different institutions. They always meet with representatives from the area and also of some of their colleagues. Hello, yes? We just have a few minutes, just wanting to let you know. And the action for sharing information throughout the territory. And then in terms of sharing awareness of best practices. We have publications that are related to management protocols that are related to videos on initiatives. We have some other videos on experiences, radio programs to improve awareness and sharing information. And then we have exchange sessions between managers. As far as results are concerned, and in closing, we have the standardization of many fishery agreements. These are some of the new challenges. We also have the standardization of commercial fishing, which was banned in 1996. We have the recovery of the stock. In some species, it's been above 427%, an increase in legal production, which started with 3 tons and has already reached. Only products advised by the Institute are 551 tons. The sale of 6,200 tons and an invoicing for more than 29 millions. The guarantee of food security for the populations in both urban and rural areas. The groups are now involved in the discussion process, in the establishment of public policies at the municipal and state level. And also we increased the participation of women in projects. Initially, it was only 1%, and now it's almost 40% of the beneficiaries of management. And we have the socio-political involvement of urban fishers who work in a conflict territory in a region, promoting the shared use. Very well, you can move on to the next, Stanley. The increase in the average income by approximately 29%, since the income that comes from management represents 40% of the whole income that comes from fishery and 50% of the general income of fishermen. And that income, in addition to contribute to the structure of domestic income, also has an impact, aside from contributing to the construction of the household income, also has the possibility of having an impact on improving fishery and the vessels. And in closing, we have the management of giving greater visibility to fishery in the region of Medio Solimões, reflecting an increase of the support of the public power and financing agents that make credits available to groups of fishermen, and they consider this being a sustainable source of financing. There are also groups of fishermen that are acknowledged for their sustainable practices, who have won awards at the national level, such as the ODM award. And then there was also an increase in the management for other locations in the Amazon, including areas outside of the protected areas. Currently, management is encompassing 22 municipalities of the state of Amazonas and in other states of the regions of northern Brazil as well. This based on the experience that we had here in this region. So that was it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ana Claudia. It was definitely very interesting, the results that you shared, many years of work, but it was definitely very interesting. And the achievements in conservation and development. Thank you very much for sharing this with us. If it seems okay with you, now we will move on to our third presentation. Our colleague, Walter Cano. Walter, how are you doing? Yes, I'm going to share my screen. While your screen loads, I'm going to leverage this opportunity to introduce you, Walter Cano Cardona, agricultural engineer, who was trained on the environment and conservation, focused on ecology and natural resources at the Utrecht University, Netherlands, with a master's degree in sustainable development from Spain, and another one in auditing from the University of Las Palmas from the Canaries in Spain. He's done specialized courses on the management of natural resources and protected areas. He has more than 25 years of general experience and more than 15 on forestry governance, management, and protected areas. He's published more than 20 papers on forestry management and 2 on protected areas based on the experience learned from the Amazon biome, the Yappa project, wherein this series of webinars is covering. So Walter, we have 20 minutes. 5 minutes prior, I will let you know so that you can start organizing your time and managing your time. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Christina. Today, I wanted to share with you the experience that we've had with the Yappa project between the years 2017 and 2018, which was precisely the first implementation stage of the project. These are regional agreements for the ordering of use of hydrobiological resources in border areas of the southern landscape. The geographic location of our experience are the national parks of Alto Purus, which is a protected area, strictly protected, the communal reserve Purus, which is on the middle basin of the Purus River in Peru, which is part of the national park Alto Purus. And finally, just like these 2 protected areas that I mentioned, we have the Chandles Park, which is part of the Chandles River, which is part of the basin of the Purus River. You can see here the 3 protected areas. They are all within a single landscape, and they are all one next to the other. Here's the border between Peru and Brazil. Now, what are the elements that drive or create the conditions that enable agreements for shared management? Here we will speak not just of those elements that are positive, so to speak, for a shared management agreement, but also those needs that are felt as urgent that make it so and compel to start building and establishing environments for discussion for establishing the shared management agreements. And in this case, as far as the Purus region is concerned, there's a problem related to fishery. In the high and middle Purus, there's intense fishing, which is for self-consumption. And there's another modality that is focused on self-consumption and the sale of surplus. And finally, commercial fishing. It's not very intensive, this commercial fishing, but it's important to take it into account because it can have an impact in this specific area of the basin, the higher basin of the Purus River. We have another important factor, which is social conflict. There is evidence of clashes between fishers and indigenous people that are in voluntary isolation because the High Purus Reserve is also part of the Mashkupiru indigenous community, which are an indigenous people that are in voluntary isolation. In fact, in 2 circumstances, when we were working there were 2 instances where we heard that this indigenous community attacked physically some fishermen from the Sharamawa, who are the ones who live in Puerto Esperanza and in the Purus River, wounding one of them with an arrow. So there's definitely social conflict that is urgent that needs to be resolved. There is also a cross-borders conflict. The populations in Purus consider that the fishing that is conducted in Brazil as the greatest problem impacting the migrating fishery resources. Although the distance is approximately 2 days travel between Purus and the region of Chandles, the region of the Purus River where the Chandles State Park is located, the intensity of the commercial fishing in the region of Brazil does have an important impact in the populations that are located in the higher basin of the Purus River. In fact, it was estimated on a yearly basis in this part of the Purus River on the Brazilian side, you can leverage up to 3,000 tons of fish flesh, which is a considerable amount, a high amount. There's a problem in the value chain. One of the biggest problems in the chain is the low quality of the fish that is sold, which has an impact in the intensity of fishery in order to offset the losses because of poor management of the flesh. And finally, gender conflicts. There's a lack of consideration for the role of women and young people and non-equitable distribution of resources and the high dependence of salesperson because they need loans in order to equip themselves to be able to travel up to the higher basin of the Purus River to do good fishing. As far as what concerns Chandlis, there is a lack of compatibility between the establishment of protected area and the expectation of the local population with regards to the right of subsistence fishing. In fact, because it's a park, there should be no populations in it, or allegedly there shouldn't be. But there is a population, there's a farmer population that has always been there in this part of the park, and which did not know how to guarantee their fundamental right, which mainly the one to subsistence. The conditionless park and the difficulty of access means that the biggest threat to catfish in the Chandlis River is overfishing in the lower basin of the Purus River. What I mentioned is the intensity of the fishing in the Purus River, which is a tributary of the Chandlis, has a considerable impact in subsistence fishing in the Chandlis River. The issue of biodiversity has been focused using a land criteria without taking into account the connection between the Chandlis River and the Purus River. In fact, the research that exists in the management plan for this protected area considers very ambiguously and very superficially the connection that exists between these rivers from a perspective of a basin. And finally, the lack of financial opportunities for the residents of the area. In fact, because they're located within a park, a protected area with the category of park, they cannot do any type of leverage with a commercial goal, which was one more reason to try to establish some type of shared agreement, shared management agreement, in this case of the catfishing. How do we establish and make official agreements for shared management of hydrobiological resources? One first element that's been key in this shared management in the Chandris and Puru area has been the building of a vision. So here I'm placing the extended wording of this vision that was developed in Purus and which has been conceived and shared in the Chandlis side. The big catfish and other fishing resources in the main channels, creeks and lagoons of the Purus and Puraha are leveraged in a sustainable manner by the indigenous people that live on the coastlines of these rivers, on the banks of these rivers. With regards to the customs of the indigenous people who live in isolation, in the current regulation and according to the life plans of the Purus River, the fishing resource of the Purus River is used to improve food security, family economy, and of the province. We apply good practices during capture, and the flesh of the fish is sold and transformed in optimal condition through a strengthened and enhanced productive chain, reaching local, national, and international markets if the conditions, agreements, and permits exist. Finally, as part of this vision, we have the promotion of cross-borders binational fishing management in cooperation with the neighboring country, Brazil. This vision was created, approved, with the participation of the local populations, the management of both protected areas in Purus and other institutions that had or were linked with the management of the protected areas. This was done on the Chandlis side as well, but with a lesser impact of institutions because it was a more isolated region. But in any event, the focus on the Chandlis region was the same. Now, what were the steps that were conducted in order to build a shared management? These were the stages, these were the requirements, the needs that had to be filled out to reach a shared agreement in Purus and Chandlis. The first are characteristics of the resource that we want to manage, the purpose of the management of the resource, the viability of applying a shared management model, because it's not just saying, oh, we're going to build a shared management agreement. We need to look at whether there are the conditions to make it. Whether there are the conditions and the collection for shared management, which is key to establish the limits and the scope of this shared agreement. Promotion of social involvement, involving stakeholders for participative, the preparation for meetings, the development of fishing models, and finally, rules, agreements, and protocols. This led to the institutions building this for a year and a half in achieving, with different visits to the site, with numerous meetings in both communities as well as collective meetings with representatives of the communities that live on the basins, on the banks of the Purus River. Now, how do we make official these agreements of shared management in Purus and Chandles? With the formalization, the acknowledgement, and legitimization of these documents. First of all, the diagnosis with primary and secondary information on the current condition of the leveraging of catfish in Chandles and its area of influence, the deed of understanding of fishing for large catfish in the Chandles Basin, the plan for managing the Purus River, the definition of volume of fishery in the National Park of Chandles, and finally, there's a document that establishes the development of shared fishing in 4 areas of the protected landscape of the South. These 5 technical documents have allowed us to legitimize the whole process for the development and the agreements for shared management in Purus and Chandles. And the acknowledgement of all of this was based on the leadership of the protected areas, of these 3 protected areas, so that there we can move on up to the executive instances of the national systems of the protected areas. What mechanisms do we use to establish rates of extraction, prohibited areas, and others? The diagnosis is undoubtedly the most important element to reach these levels of specificity that relate to the regulation of fishing. The diagnosis in the case of Chandles, the fishery management plan in the case of Purus, which includes a diagnosis on what was happening with the fishing of great catfish, this has allowed us to reach a clearer understanding on how fish are fished in Purus and Chandles, an understanding of the needs related to subsistence fishing in Chandles, which was not clear before the development of these shared agreements, because there was no clear vision of how intense or how strong was the dependence on the Chandles population on the consumption of hydrobiological resources, which jointly allowed defining the fishing volumes in Chandles and Purus as references for their fishing. Now, the management plan for Purus was the instrument that most clearly allowed to formalize these fishing agreements. This management plan is structured based on 4 strategies: the strategy for fishing monitoring, the strategies of fishing ordering, the strategy of governance, and the strategy for optimization of the productive chain of the fish. At this time, the Yappa's project is implementing a consultancy program to determine how much progress we've made and if we manage to legalize and acknowledge at the level of the national instances. What are the main challenges in achieving the agreements for shared management in Purus and Chandles? Among the challenges, we have the lack of specific public policies that can regulate the use and leverage of hydrobiological resources, despite the fact that in most of our countries, our constitution acknowledge implicitly the importance of the hydrobiological resources, and in almost none of the countries exists specific regulation for their leveraging. The agreements for the shared management of fishery resources become fragile when there's no national policy or regional policy on management and conservation. If there is no legal umbrella at the national level, it's very difficult for the shared management agreements to have a long-term duration. It's very difficult. The provision of local inhabitants to take part in developing the protected areas and to protect their fishery resource was clear, but did not have a clear direction to make it effective, because in most of these populations in all 3 protected areas, they have no previous experience in shared management agreements on hydrobiological resources, because the rivers are free access. And so it's easier to make shared management agreements in natural resources that are on land, because there is where you can define spaces with a lot of clarity. The need to design and apply new regulations in the rivers and the biology and ecology of these fishery species, which is greatly absent for most of the experiences that we've had on the management of these resources. States must acknowledge the importance of going beyond national limits and implementing a cross-borders vision, since protected areas or natural spaces don't respect any borders, and natural processes within these environments neither. So we need to start considering them from a different perspective, and all of this is the regulatory vision. The stakeholders that live in the buffer areas must be involved in participating in the decision-making. While the communities that live in the protected areas are the ones that are most impacted by the management of the protected area, that does not mean that those who live in the buffer areas are not. In fact, in some cases, they are much more impacted than the populations within the protected areas themselves. The fishery management shared is a process. Its success depends on the trust that exists between the different stakeholders that interact in the governance table. Meaning, in the case of hydrobiological resources in Purus, only reaching a level of trust where everyone is sure that everybody will respect the rules and the ban areas, only at that level
So only by building this level of trust, we will be able to attain the real construction of shared agreements. And even though legislation in other countries have specific aspects on how to face this challenge, each protected area is going to have a specific approach. So we cannot mention something in general, because all the processes for these types of agreements cannot apply to a whole national system. And as for the legal importance, well, and consequences of non-compliance, well, there is no legal weight of these agreements, or at least not in a formal manner. So if we cannot legitimize all these elements, it is highly unlikely to provide this legality to the agreements, and the formalization of these instruments will depend on the category of each protected area, because it's going to be much more hardest to formalize a management instrument within a park in which the management conditions for said park are going to establish the intangible use of natural resources, and different to other types of protected areas, because in most of them on the Amazon, these agreements might not be as explicit when it comes to national regulation and management plans. So the validity of the agreements depends on the institutional and political will. And the legitimacy of at least the formalization of these types of agreements results from the will of the directors of protected areas. And in many cases, those agreements are left informal, because the legal framework of the protected areas do not allow for the legalization of these agreements. And thus, we're going to have a strong trend to work under informal conditions in most all systems of protected areas in a continent. So this shared agreement should be taken and applied, not in general, but according to each specific protected area at national level. And this is one of the biggest challenges that we have for protected areas in a continent, because each protected area must consider that it's unique in spite of the similarities. And this is the reason why they have been declared as protected areas with specific conservation values. But what happens if this shared management agreement cannot be possible? Well, what can we do? Well, first, fishing in the lower basin of Purus in Brazil can have a significant impact on the fishing resources in Peru. And if the situation is not regulated, this can keep on increasing with time. And if there are no agreements, and the lack of data to evaluate overfishing should be permanent, and there will be no clarity regarding what is going on in the sector. And when we don't have regulations for the acceptance and collective compliance, we cannot control any modality of fishing or periods and places. And in a situation like this, there's going to have opportunism and individual interest, something that is quite clear in protected areas, where the head of the management for that protected area is not solid or consistent and integrated. And it's not thus able to demonstrate a good implementation of this handling plan. And we need the accuracy when it comes to identifying threats, and the role of local knowledge and science in decision-making processes for these agreements. We must think that science defines reality, does not allow to legitimate other realities, those realities that are affected by the way in which these natural resources are affected. So local knowledge and science are supplementary for an objective decision making, which is what we want in practice. And this is what is currently going on in theory. So we must join the two. So in the integration of multiple knowledge can be crucial for the conservation of the ecosystems and their communities. And actually, a great number of scientists indicate that a holistic look at diverse systems of knowledge will not only allow to enrich our knowledge, but also improve the understanding of nature and contribute in a fair and inclusive manner to decision making in the environmental field. I have a couple of pictures here, one with a road and another where there's no path, there's just a forest. So this is the way in which we can interpret the situations. So this is a way to explain that we should include more than one perspective. And who's going to pay for the cost of all these agreements? Everyone and no one. Because as for costs, this is something that we'll take on voluntarily, because some things and processes should be regulated. And if we don't do it, then the damage, economic damage, can be much more higher than the cost of taking it on. So thank you for your attention. Thank you, Walter. It's been great to be able. So, well, after these three presentations, for the time remaining, we'll go back to Stanley for the Q&A session. Walter, can you stop sharing your screen, please? If you have any questions or concerns, you can write them down on the chat. Please let us know who the question is addressed to. Well, the three presentations have been really interesting. The Limoncocha experience, and this is a relatively small lagoon, we could say, with limited resources for a community that is keep on growing. And so the three cases have been really interesting. And in order to start all the processes, they are all concerned about the future scarcity. And we must understand that the practices that are being implemented are not sustainable, maybe through time. So we have too many questions. So I would like to kindly ask the three speakers that when I ask you a questions, please answer without too many examples or without too much elaboration or data, so that we can cover questions in 1 minute tops, so that we can cover as many questions as possible, and then we can have diversity in the answers. The first question in the chat from Manuela de Jesus talks about the adaptability of these resources and their incidence on the political aspect. And we'll join this question to one from Maria Ortiz from Argentina that mentions if everything is related to the life plans, or how can they be linked to the life plans or the plans of the community. So if these plans can be adapted, if they are going to have an incidence, well, Walter mentioned something related to this, but we'd like to know if these agreements are going to have a certain change on public policies for the use of resources, and if they have some relation with the life plans. We are going to start with Claudia from Amiragua. Claudia? Claudia, are you with us? Well, then let's move on with Darwin. Darwin, are you there? Darwin, can you hear me? You must turn on your microphone, please. Oh. Please go ahead. Can you repeat the question? I did not get it. Well, there are 3 points. First, if these agreements can be adapted through time, and how often are they adapted, and do these agreements have some sort of incidence in changes in public policies? In the case of Ecuador, have they been taken into consideration for the implementation of and handling of fishing resources? And if these agreements are somehow related to the plans of the communities, to the life plans? For example, the Quechuas, and I don't remember what else you mentioned, if they use these agreements. You have 1 minute, so please be quick. Thank you. Well, the code of conduct for fishing has been designed for 5 years, and the idea was to conduct an analysis to see if it's being efficient, and if the results were good, then we can renew this code of conduct, and or improved is needed, but due to the elections we have not been able to renew it. So, but as for its validity, it's a 5-year term, and this is because I mentioned that, because for the local authorities during the election time, this is, I don't know, there's no possible way to manage it, and we haven't reached a 100% agreement for these topics. So this is the reality. And as for the life plans, I think that this is done by the autonomous government. And of course, the current plans have been very individual, with no consideration of the protected areas around these communities. So recently, protected areas are starting to be included in decision making and the preparation of these life plans. And it's also important to take into consideration the code of conduct for fishing. Some aspects have been considered for the life plan, so we're currently working on these projects. And as for the policies specifically, with the Ministry of the Environment, we have been implementing and working specifically on a fishing law. There's a fishing bill that has already been specifically approved by the Congress. So for the future, we're going to have all the legal regulations, and we're currently working on the fishing area for the protected areas. And that agreement is feeding the law, right? Somehow. Yes. Well, part of this fishing agreement, just to mention it, well, it's already been implemented in some protected areas. I have been requested by some of the heads of the communities, with Tena as well, which is also a protected area. And we also have a plan for this sustainable code of conduct fishing in Kuru. So it's starting to happen when it comes to this governance, but I think that the initiative was from Limoncocha, and advances have been made in some things, and much faster than others, thanks to the support of the stakeholders, but I think that we are advancing. Thank you, Darwin. Walter? Yes, as for the first question, the vision which when we prepared these agreements in tree protected areas was for adaptive planning. So the agreements must be adapted because we're talking about resources that can be depleted at any time without the right planning. So I think that we must review them periodically in order to ensure that the goals are being attained when it comes to the sustainable handling of resources. Also, if there is political incidents in Peru, we are trying for them to have these political incidents because we want these fishing plans to be recognized by OTIREPO, which is the Direction for Production of Peru. It is a government institution. So if we obtain this recognition, these shared management agreements would become a reference for any other type of initiative for shared management in the country for this type of environment. And finally, if they are agree with the life plans, of course it's in agreement, but not only that, they have derived from the life plans of the populations that reside in these areas. And this is the reason why I mentioned that the participation of the communities in the preparation of this agreement has been vital throughout the process in Puros and Chandres because their knowledge and experience have been the basis for these agreements. Thank you, Walter. Ana Claudia, can you hear me? Well, looks like we lost her again. She has unstable connection, so we'll keep on advancing to the second question while she reconnects. And from Manuel Castillo in Costa Rica for both projects. Have these agreements improved the technologies, and are they using the new technologies somehow for the fishing activities and their improvement? From an innovative standpoint, have these agreements been able to innovate somehow? And then the incidents and results in local governance and public policies. Well, you already mentioned this. So I would like to turn this question and ask how these agreements have had an incidence in these social groups or communities or groups of users to attain a better self-management of the resources. And not only becoming just the compliers with the laws, but are they concerned on how to handle these resources? For example, Darwin, in the case of Limon Cocha, these groups that are part of the agreement, do you think that they are somehow concerned to understand that the fish are decreasing, and are they taking measures in order to create, I don't know, a way to have a seed fish or establishing processes in order to improve the conservation status so that they become handlers and not only being interested in compliance with the agreement? So can we consider these two elements for the question? If there is innovation, and if these groups are taking on the self-management of the resources or just complying with the law. Darwin? Yes, thank you. There are two aspects. Not 100% of the community would be in agreement with the code of fishing, not 100%. So the group that is in agreement have seen, in addition to the natural compliance, they've seen alternatives like tourism. So this is what they are focusing on, tourism, because they think that it's much more profitable. So they are now the most important stakeholders because they are creating associations and they are now the regulating bodies for the fishermen to monitor compliance, and they are analyzing tourism as an alternative. Well, that would be the fundamental aspect, I would say. because they are supporting us when it comes to all of these regulations and for those that are not in compliance. And we have meetings with the different groups, but they also have a general meeting that takes place every 6 months. And this is where they discuss all pending topics, why, who is not complying, and everything is up for debate. So I think that this is not part of the internal regulations when it comes to sanctions for their own members, but they are currently working to try and support these regulations and to eventually be able to apply a sanction as a community for those members that are not complying. And I think that much advance has been made on this process. And as for innovation, I think that we have government support, like the support of some parishes, and they are starting, I don't know, cultivating fish to take away the pressure. So these are some of the projects that they are currently working on for feeding purposes, and also for the social and economic aspect. So I think that they are not only focusing now on coffee and cocoa, because they are launching now new projects in order to take away the pressure. And so we are talking with local fish, and also other types of species that can be easily reproduced. So that I can mention as innovative, but they are focusing on new projects, not only to be dedicated to coffee and cocoa or palm, which is what they focused on in the beginning. Thank you, Darwin. Walter? Yes, the populations, mainly Purus, being a community reserve, are aware of the need to handle resources, because they are also aware, and they were the ones that gave the first alert of something happening with the big catfish that are the ones that they use the most. And also after the agreement, this resulted in innovation, both at when it comes to the techniques and the regulations for fishing, that they were willing to comply with in order to ensure the sustainable use of resources. First, they started adopting responsible fishing methods with the lowest impact possible of other species that were not used, and they have adopted agreements when it comes to ban or close the season in a collective manner. And as far as I know, we have not seen non-compliance on this area, but populations are now handling their resources. And one of the most important things in Peru is how they handle taricaya, this turtle, the water turtle. So the populations during a certain season take care of them. So part of the eggs, they give back to the river a significant amount of these specimens in good conditions. So I think that there's this empowerment when it comes to the needs of handling resources. Yes, very interesting how these processes and agreements start from a problem when there is a lack of resources, and we have regulations and protected areas. Then comes an agreement, and they start empowering innovation, training, and everything that Ana Claudia mentioned about the strengthening of skills, organizations, marketing, and a series of elements that are going to turn this in the handlers and not only the implementers of these resources. And we take the governance to the resources to the hands of the communities, and the surveillance and regulation of the government with the traditional knowledge and the innovation and science. Ana Claudia, are you here? Can you activate your mic if you're with us? Well, she was supposed to be connected, but I see her, but we cannot listen to her. Can you please speak, Ana Claudia, to see if we can hear you? No, we lost the connection again. Well, this is very unfortunate because the experience of is very interesting. Ana Claudia, are you with us? Were you able to listen to the questions? No, I think that the connection is way too unstable. So, as Claudia Núñez said, thanks to this pandemic, we have been able to connect remotely, but, well, not without internet. So I would like to start the closing of today's session and the cycle of webinars by giving the opportunity to Walter and Darwin to come up with a final reflection for just 1 minute as a reflection for everyone listening to us. Those who think that this might be too complicated, that it costs a lot of money, and that is way too hard. So what is your final balance? The cost-benefit analysis of this whole process. Can you come up with a motivational reflection for the people? Is it worth being part of these processes? Along with the communities, what is your final message or closing remarks based on each one's experience? Darwin, please go ahead. Yes, in my experience throughout all this process, the truth is that the work is hard. It's not as easy to work with the communities. It can be complicated by the assistance and the love that you put into the work of conservation of natural resources and taking care of our home. I think that has made this possible. And as I said, it's not as easy, but insisting and willing to leave a legacy and for all these resources to be available for future generations, and for them to see that we contributed somehow for these resources to remain through time is really fulfilling and satisfying. And it's very nice to work with the communities and also learn from them, because there are new things to learn every day. Well, their visions might be different than ours, but we keep on learning, and I feel very satisfied to be able to share with them and to relate with them. And I think that the park rangers and all of that. And it's been really nice to socialize, which I think is really important. So this is what I wanted to express to you. So I guess that not 100% of the goals have been attained, but we have advanced. And the idea is to improve this code of vision. And of course, there are some weaknesses and things that we are trying to keep on determining to improve, but the idea is work together with the community. And now we can have a more fluent communications than when we recently started. So I think that we have been able to change the train of thought, and this is the idea to attain better agreements. And I think that by the end of the year, we want to have it signed by all the local stakeholders and the whole community. So I think that is quite satisfying for me. Thank you, Darwin, for that final reflection and for your presentation and for your time and for being here and sharing your experience with us. And before moving on to Walter, let's start turning on your cameras for the screenshot of all participants. Walter, your final remarks. Yes, everything that is related to conservation is complicated, because everything related to conservation, one way or the other, is going to touch or affect someone's interests. So in my opinion, and I have been director of a protected area, so I have gone through the fight for conservation and out there on the field, and also from the outside by working from people like Stanley and other group of very committed professionals committed to conservation. So I know how hard it is to manage a protected area, but from my experience in Marurite, I think that being able to empower the communities and those who are directly affected by the protected area itself is the first step to be successful in the creation of participated governance. And thus, if we are able to raise awareness in the communities on how important it is to handle resources in a sustainable, responsible manner, is the first step towards a success in the creation of these shared management agreements. And I've seen that in Chandres, in Casumbaira Sena, and in other protected areas that are part of the South landscape of the Yappa project. So that's my reflection. We must be consequent as the managers and supporters and scientists involved in conservation. We need to keep on searching for these types of alliances, because this is precisely where we are going to set the success for the conservation. Thank you. Thank you, Walter. And as I said, please take on your cameras, turn them on, and keep smiling for the screenshot. So as Walter said, we must keep on working or in fighting for conservation. Let's not take a step back, but we must understand that in order to do so, we need to keep on working for the people and with the people that are walking with us throughout this process of conservation. This is one of the most important conclusions of these 8 webinars. Please keep on smiling while the picture is taken. And I know it's kind of boring, but we need the time to take all screenshots. So again, thank you everyone for your participation in this cycle of webinars. And this is the cycle of governance and the century in which we must understand that conservation processes have governance as the basis to attain conservation. And let's not allow COVID to take this dream away from us. So we are going to follow this dream of conservation, as Claudia said in the beginning. So we are about to close. Thank you, Bernardo, and the whole interpreters team for an excellent work. Thank you for supporting us throughout this whole cycle. And thank you, Paula, Veronica, everyone here. And thank all the speakers and participants. It's been an excellent, wonderful job. It's been great to have all those experiences. And I would also like to thank our speakers, because they have invested their personal time and for free. And so it's been a great contribution. So a big thank you to all of you. And of course, thank you all participants. because you've made this possible. I see a lot of familiar faces, Tariq, Manuel, Angel. So we see too many people, Guillermo. So my greetings to all of you, all the way to Brazil and everywhere. So it's really nice to have you all here. I see Viviana from Senam. So thank you, everyone. It's been a wonderful experience, very interesting, but gratifying above all. So a big hug to you all, and hopefully we'll see you soon.